The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Mei Lin's small apartment as her alarm blared for the third time. She groaned and rolled over, her fingers instinctively stretching wide before curling into a fist. 6 years of working at Hank's Diner and mornings never got easier. Not today, she mumbled, finally silencing the alarm. Her tiny studio apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. A stack of unpaid bills sat on her kitchen counter, the red final notice stamp on the electric bill serving as her daily reminder of why she couldn't afford to be late. Mei Lin went through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, brush teeth, pull her long black hair into a tight ponytail, and put on the pale blue uniform dress that smelled perpetually of coffee and fryer oil, despite countless washes. As she buttoned up, she hummed softly, her voice carrying the complex melody of Debussy's Clair de Lune without her even realizing it. The tune had been stuck in her head for days, playing on repeat like a stubborn memory refusing to fade. She paused at her closet door before leaving, looking at the dusty black case pushed far into the corner, almost hidden behind winter coats and boxes. 6 years, and she still couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. 6 years since she'd opened it. 6 years since she'd touched the keys that once meant everything to her. Not today, she repeated, closing the door firmly. The walk to Hank's Diner took exactly 12 minutes, and Mei Lin used that time to shift mental gears. By the time she pushed open the back door at 6:48 a.m., she was no longer the girl who once played Rachmaninoff with tears streaming down her face. She was just another waitress starting another shift. "You're cutting it close," Darlene said from the grill, her wrinkled face set in its usual frown. After 30 years at Hank's, Darlene had earned the right to comment on everyone's punctuality. "Good morning to you too," Mei Lin replied with a practiced smile, tying her apron around her waist. The kitchen already smelled of bacon and coffee, the familiar scents that would cling to her hair and skin until her evening shower. "Is Pat still out sick?" "Third day. He's back again." "You're covering sections 3 and 4. Mei Lin nodded, suppressing a sigh. Double sections meant more tips, but also meant she'd be running non-stop until her shift ended. She grabbed her order pad and pens, checked her appearance in the reflection of the napkin dispenser, and pushed through the swinging doors into the dining area. Hank's Diner wasn't fancy. The vinyl booths had been patched too many times to count. The linoleum floor was worn thin in high-traffic areas, and the jukebox in the corner only worked when it felt like it. But the food was good, the coffee was strong, and the regulars were loyal. It was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to be seen and heard and remembered. "Morning sunshine," called out Lou, a retired postal worker who came in every day at 7 a.m. sharp for 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and endless coffee refills. "Morning. Lou, the usual?" Mei Lin asked, already pouring his coffee. "You know it."
"Any big plans for your day off tomorrow?"
Mei Lin shrugged, setting the mug in front of him. "Laundry. Maybe catch up on sleep." She didn't mention the night class she was taking at the community college, an accounting course that bored her to tears but promised a path to a more stable future. She had learned long ago that sharing too much of herself only led to questions she didn't want to answer. The morning rush came in waves. First the early birds like Lou, then the business people grabbing breakfast before work, followed by the late risers who straggled in around 10. Mei Lin moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her mind split between orders and small talk and the ever-present melody running through her head. Her hands were constantly busy, carrying plates, wiping tables, counting change, yet her fingers occasionally twitched in small, precise movements, as if playing invisible keys. "Order up," Darlene called, and Mei Lin hurried to the pass-through window, balancing 4 plates along her arm with the skill that came from years of practice. As she served a family of tourists, her attention was caught by the little boy no more than 6, who was humming softly while coloring on his placemat. She recognized the tune immediately. Fur-Elise, simplified but unmistakable. Without thinking, she hummed the next phrase, and the boy looked up in surprise, then grinned. "You know it too," he exclaimed. "Thomas, don't bother the nice lady," his mother said, embarrassed. "It's no bother," Mei Lin assured her with a genuine smile. "Do you play piano?" she asked the boy. He nodded enthusiastically. "I started lessons last year. I practice every day. Mom says I'm getting really good." "I bet you are," Mei Lin said, feeling a strange mix of joy and pain. "Keep it up, okay?" It's a beautiful thing to have music in your life. As she walked away, the melody in her head shifted to Fur-Elise, and for a moment she was 16 again, sitting at the grand piano in the conservatory, her teacher nodding with rare approval as her fingers danced across the keys. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by the reality of spilled coffee on table 7 and a new group of customers waiting to be seated. This was her life now, practical, predictable, necessary. Music was a luxury she had given up long ago. When her father's medical bills started piling up and her mother couldn't manage alone, the lunch rush hit at 11:30, and for the next 2 hours, Mei-Lin had no time to think about anything except orders and refills and the growing ache in her feet. The diner hummed with conversation and the clatter of silverware, a chaotic symphony that required all her attention to navigate. It was during these busiest moments that Mei-Lin felt most at peace. When every second was accounted for, when her mind was fully occupied with immediate tasks, the old longing stayed quiet. It was only in the lulls, like now as the crowd thinned out after lunch, that the music in her head grew louder, more insistent. She wiped down a recently vacated booth, her cloth moving in time to the rhythm only she could hear. Without realizing it, her lips began to move, silently counting out the beats of a complex time signature. 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3. "You always look like you're somewhere else when you clean tables," said Vicky, another waitress who had started a few months ago. Young and chatty, Vicky seemed determined to break through Mei-Lin's carefully maintained wall of privacy. "Just thinking about what I need to do after work," Mei-Lin replied, straightening up and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "A bunch of us are going out tonight. You should come. There's this new bar on 5th with live music on Thursdays." The invitation was casual, friendly, and exactly what Mei-Lin always avoided. "Thanks, but I'm picking up an early shift tomorrow for extra cash," she lied smoothly. The truth was, she couldn't bear to sit in a bar listening to live music, watching others do what she had once dreamed of doing herself. "Rain check, then," Vicky said, not looking particularly disappointed. Mei-Lin had declined often enough that no one really expected her to say yes anymore. The afternoon dragged on, the diner quieting to a gentle lull between lunch and dinner. Mei-Lin refilled salt shakers and napkin dispensers, brewed fresh coffee, and tried to ignore the dull ache that had settled in her shoulders. At 32, she was already feeling the physical toll of a job that kept her on her feet for 8 hours at a stretch. A man at the counter caught her attention. Not a regular, but there was something vaguely familiar about him. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with silver-streaked hair and glasses that slid down his nose as he read a newspaper. He had ordered only coffee and a slice of apple pie, which he ate slowly, methodically, as if savoring every bite. As Mei-Lin approached to offer a refill, she noticed his fingers drumming lightly on the counter. Not random tapping, but a precise pattern that made her heart skip a beat. It was the opening bars of Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. Complex, unmistakable, impossible to replicate without knowing the piece intimately. Their eyes met as she poured his coffee, and something passed between them, a flash of recognition that had nothing to do with having met before. He smiled, and Mei-Lin quickly looked away, suddenly afraid of what he might see in her face. "Thank you," he said, his voice gentle. "Excellent coffee. Can I get you anything else?" she asked, professional mask firmly back in place. He shook his head. The pie was perfect. "Homemade?" "Darlene makes it fresh every morning," Mei-Lin replied, already edging away. Something about this man made her uneasy, not in a threatening way, but as if he could somehow see past her carefully constructed facade. Throughout the rest of her shift, she felt his eyes on her occasionally, observing with quiet interest. She did her best to avoid his section of the counter, letting Vicky handle his bill when he finally decided to leave. As the dinner crowd began to arrive, Mei-Lin found herself humming again, this time a piece she had composed herself during her second year at the conservatory. She caught herself and stopped abruptly, focusing instead on the family of 4 waiting to be seated. "Welcome to Hank's," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Table for 4? Right this way." And so the evening continued, a blur of orders and plates and polite conversation. If her fingers occasionally twitched with phantom melodies, if her mind sometimes wandered to a dusty piano case in the corner of her closet, well, that was her secret to keep. Friday nights at Hank's Diner were always chaotic. The weekend crowd started rolling in around 5 p.m. Families with restless children, teenagers on dates, workers stopping in after their shifts ended. By 7 p.m., every booth was filled. The waitstaff was running on pure adrenaline, and the kitchen was a blur of motion and shouted orders. Mei Lin had learned to thrive in this chaos. 17 plates balanced along her arms in a single hour, 32 coffee refills, countless "How is everything?" check-ins with just the right blend of friendliness and efficiency. The rhythm of a busy shift left no room for daydreams or memories or regrets. It was just her, the customers, and the next immediate task. A simple equation that added up to survival. "Need 6 hands tonight," Vicky complained, squeezing past Mei Lin to grab a stack of clean mugs. Her cheeks were flushed, her usually perfect makeup beginning to smudge at the corners. "Better than dead empty," Mei Lin replied, arranging 4 plates along her left arm while balancing a 5th in her right hand. "Tips are good when we're slammed." The bell above the front door jingled yet again, and both women glanced over to see an older man enter, briefcase in hand, looking slightly overwhelmed by the noise and activity. He stood near the entrance, scanning the packed dining room with a bemused expression. "I'll get him," Mei Lin said, already delivering her armload of plates to a nearby table. "Enjoy your meals," she added with a quick smile before heading toward the newcomer. Up close, she recognized him as the man from yesterday, the one who had drummed Chopin on the counter and watched her with curious eyes. Today he wore a tweed jacket with leather patches at the elbows, looking every bit the stereotypical academic. "Just one tonight?" she asked, reaching for a menu. "If you can find room for me," he replied with a gentle smile. "Seems like the whole town had the same idea." Mei Lin glanced around. "Counter okay? It'll be at least 20 minutes for a table." "Counter's perfect." She led him to one of the few empty stools at the long formica counter, sliding a menu in front of him. "Coffee to start?" "Please," he said, then added, "You were here yesterday, weren't you?" "I remember you." Mei Lin nodded, pouring his coffee with practiced ease. "Can I get you anything else while you decide on food?" "I'm Harrison," he said, ignoring her question. "Harrison Walsh." She paused, uncertain how to respond to this departure from the usual customer-server script. "I'm Mei Lin," she finally said, tapping her name tag with a slight smile. "Special tonight is meatloaf with 2 sides for $12.99. "Nice to meet you properly, Mei Lin," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll take a few minutes with the menu." She nodded and moved away, pulled back into the whirlwind of her shift. For the next hour, she barely had time to breathe, let alone chat with customers. Harrison ordered the special and ate slowly, occasionally glancing up to observe the controlled chaos around him. Twice she caught him watching her specifically, his head slightly tilted as if trying to solve a puzzle. It was nearly 9 p.m. when the crowd finally began to thin. Families with young children had gone home, the after-work crowd had moved on to bars or movie theaters, and the diner settled into its late-evening lull. Only a handful of customers remained, a couple lingering over coffee and dessert, a truck driver having a late dinner, and Harrison, who had long since finished his meal but seemed in no hurry to leave. As Mei Lin wiped down a nearby section of the counter, she became aware that her lips were moving silently, following along with the song playing in her head. It happened sometimes when she was tired, her mental guard slipping just enough to let the music seep through. Tonight it was Bach, precise and mathematical, a piece she had performed at her last recital before everything changed. Goldberg Variations, Harrison said quietly. "Number 13, if I'm not mistaken." Mei Lin's hand froze mid-wipe. She looked up to find him watching her with that same curious expression. "I'm sorry?" "You were counting the rhythm. Your lips were moving." He demonstrated, silently mouthing 1-2-3, 1-2-3, Bach's Goldberg Variations. Number 13 has that distinctive time signature change that trips up even seasoned pianists. The cloth in Mei Lin's hand dripped soapy water onto the counter. She quickly wiped it up, buying time to compose herself. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, though the denial felt hollow even to her own ears. Harrison didn't push. Instead, he sipped his coffee and changed the subject. "How long have you worked here?" 6 years, she answered, relieved by the shift to safer territory. "Do you enjoy it?" The question was simple, asked without judgment, yet Mei Lin found herself unexpectedly stuck for an answer. Did she enjoy waitressing? It had never seemed relevant. It was necessary, it was reliable, it was what she did. "It's a good place," she finally said. "Darlene's been cooking here for 30 years. The regulars are nice. Tips are decent." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Not what you plan to do with your life, though, I'm guessing." "Is anyone doing exactly what they planned?" she countered, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. He smiled at that. "Fair point. I certainly never planned to retire as a community college music teacher. I had visions of conducting the London Symphony Orchestra." The word music hung in the air between them. Maylene felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she got when passing a piano in a hotel lobby or hearing a classical piece unexpectedly in a grocery store. "Were you a musician?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Still am, just not professionally anymore. Piano mainly, though I dabbled with violin in my youth." He tilted his head again, studying her. "And you?" "Conservatory training, if I had to guess." "Juilliard? Oberlin?" The tightness in Maylene's chest expanded, making it hard to breathe. 6 years of carefully avoiding this exact conversation, of rebuilding her identity around order pads and coffee pots. And now this stranger had seen through her in minutes. "I need to check on my other tables," she said, turning away. She busied herself with unnecessary tasks, refilling salt shakers that were still full, straightening napkin dispensers, wiping down clean tables. When she finally returned to the counter, having run out of distractions, Harrison was writing something on a napkin. "I've embarrassed you," he said, looking up as she approached. "I apologize. Occupational hazard of being a teacher for 40 years. I see a student with talent, I can't help but pry." "You haven't embarrassed me," Maylene said quietly. "It's just ancient history." 5 or 6 years isn't so ancient," Harrison replied with a gentle smile. "Especially not for something you clearly still carry with you." Before she could respond, Vicky appeared at her elbow. "I'm headed out. Joe said he'd give me a ride. You okay closing up?" Maylene nodded. "Go ahead. I'll see you tomorrow." As Vicky left, the diner grew quieter still. The couple in the booth finally paid their bill and departed. The truck driver was scrolling through his phone, finishing a last cup of coffee. And Harrison was still watching her with those kind, knowing eyes. "What's your story, Maylene?" he asked softly. "How does someone who can mentally track Bach's Goldberg variations end up waiting tables at Hank's diner?" Perhaps it was the quiet of the nearly empty restaurant, or the exhaustion of a long week, or simply the relief of being truly seen after years of hiding. Whatever the reason, Maylene found herself sitting on the stool next to Harrison, her apron still tied around her waist, telling him things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She told him about growing up in a household where music was as essential as air. Her mother, a former violinist with the state orchestra before arthritis claimed her hands. Her father, who couldn't play a note but could listen to Beethoven with tears streaming down his face. She described her first piano lesson at age 6, the immediate connection she felt to the instrument, the scholarships that followed. She spoke of the prestigious conservatory where she had studied from age 16, the teachers who had marked her as exceptional, the future that had seemed so bright and certain. And then she told him about her father's diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, aggressive and merciless. About her mother's devastation, about medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover, about coming home to help and never finding a way back. "He fought for 2 years," she said, twisting her hands in her lap. "By the time it was over, we'd lost the house, my mother's health was broken, and I couldn't just abandon her to chase my own dreams." Harrison listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finally fell silent, he nodded slowly. "And now?" he asked gently. "Your mother?" "She lives in assisted living about 20 minutes from here. I see her 3 times a week. She's stable. And your music?" Maylene looked down at her hands that had once coaxed magic from 88 keys, now calloused from carrying hot plates and scrubbing tables. "I haven't touched a piano in 6 years, she admitted. "I still have mine, but it hurts too much." Harrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He separated one from the ring and placed it on the counter between them. "The community center on Oak Street," he said. "I volunteer there teaching music appreciation to seniors on Wednesday afternoons. There's a piano in the back room. Nothing fancy, just an old upright that nobody uses. This key opens the side door." He slid the key toward her. "No pressure, no audience, no expectations. just in case you ever want to remember what it feels like. Maylin stared at the key, her heart pounding in her chest. I can't just— You can, Harrison said simply. Anytime between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. the building's open, but that room stays locked. Nobody will disturb you. He stood, leaving money for his bill and a generous tip. The piano's been waiting for someone who understands it. Maybe you've been waiting too. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Talent like yours doesn't disappear, Maylin. It just waits for the right moment to resurface. The bell jingled as he left, and Maylin remained on the stool, staring at the key that gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights. A small, unexpected bridge to the world she had left behind. The key sat on Maylin's nightstand for 3 days, untouched. Each morning she would look at it while getting ready for work, the small piece of metal somehow taking up more space in her mind than anything else in the apartment. Each night she would come home tired from her shift, glance at the key and find some reason not to use it. Too exhausted. Need to do laundry. Early shift tomorrow. Mother needs a phone call. On the 4th day she picked it up. The metal was cool against her palm, surprisingly heavy for such a small object. She slipped it into her pocket, telling herself she was just taking it to return to Harrison. He hadn't been back to the diner since their conversation, and the key felt like an unwelcome responsibility. After her morning shift ended at 2 p.m., Maylin found herself walking past her bus stop, past the turn to her apartment, heading instead toward Oak Street. The community center was a squat brick building with faded lettering above the entrance and a small patchy lawn out front. Nothing like the gleaming practice rooms at the conservatory, with their perfect acoustics and polished grand pianos. She circled the building twice looking for the side door Harrison had mentioned. It was a plain metal door, unremarkable except for the small sign that read "Staff Only." Maylin stood before it for a full 5 minutes, key in hand, heart racing as if she were about to commit a crime. What if someone questioned why she was there? What if the key didn't work? What if it did? This is ridiculous, she muttered, finally pushing the key into the lock with slightly trembling fingers. It turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal a dim hallway lined with storage closets. The air inside smelled of dust and old books and something else. Furniture polish, maybe. Maylin moved quietly, following the hallway until it opened into a larger space filled with folding tables and chairs stacked against the walls. A bulletin board near a water fountain displayed community announcements and class schedules. Music appreciation with Professor Walsh, Wednesdays. 1-3 p.m. gentle yoga for seniors, Mondays and Fridays at 10 to 11. AM community board meeting, first Tuesday of every month, Maylin. Followed signs toward classroom C and found another door, this one with a small window. Through the glass, she could see a modest-sized room with metal folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. And there, against the back wall, stood an upright piano. Not the sleek black instrument of her memories, but an older model with visible scratches on its wooden case. The second key required more courage than the first. Maylin's hand shook so badly she had to steady it with her other hand to get the key in the lock. When the door finally opened, she stepped inside and closed it behind her, leaning back against it as if afraid it might disappear. The room was silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. Afternoon sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, creating golden bars across the linoleum floor. The piano waited, patient and indifferent, its closed lid like a challenge. Maylin approached it slowly, circling it once as if it might suddenly move. The bench was old, its padding worn thin but stable. She ran her fingers lightly over the closed lid, collecting a thin film of dust. When she finally lifted it, the keys beneath were yellowed with age but intact, like the smile of an elderly person who had seen much but retained their dignity. She sat on the bench without touching the keys, her hands resting in her lap. 6 years. 6 years since she had felt the cool ivory beneath her fingertips, since she had translated the music in her head into sound that others could hear. 6 years of silence while inside her head symphonies continued to play. The first note, a middle C, rang out in the quiet room like a statement. Maylin snatched her hand back as if burned, startled by the actual sound after so much imagined music. The note hung in the air, then faded, leaving a void that demanded to be filled. Slowly, deliberately, she placed both hands on the keys and began to play a simple scale, C major, the first scale every piano student learns. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy, not responding the way she remembered. She tried again, forcing her ring finger to stretch for the F, her pinky to reach the G up and down, 5-finger exercises she had mastered at age 7. Her hands remembered even if her muscles protested. Again and again she played until the movements began to feel natural once more. When she finally attempted Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her favorite piece from childhood, she stumbled immediately. Notes that should have flowed like water came out disjointed and awkward. Her left hand couldn't stretch to reach the intervals it once had managed with ease. Her right couldn't maintain the delicate melody line without faltering. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away and continued working through the piece measure by measure, accepting each mistake as the price of her long absence. By the third attempt, it was smoother. By the fifth, recognizable, though still lacking the fluidity it deserved. Mei Lin lost track of time, focused only on the conversation between her hands and the keys. The sun shifted, the bars of light on the floor moving, fading until they disappeared altogether. Only when the room grew too dim to read the music in her head did she finally stop, her hands aching in a way she had almost forgotten, the good ache of muscles used for their intended purpose. She closed the lid gently, wiped her fingerprints from the keys, and left the room as quietly as she had entered. 3 days later, she returned, and again 2 days after that. Each visit lasted longer than the last. She began bringing sheet music, printouts from the library's public computers of pieces she had once known by heart. Gradually, her fingers regained their strength, her hands their flexibility. The music began to flow again, first in halting streams, then in steadier currents. On her 6th visit, absorbed in Debussy's Clair de Lune, she didn't hear the door open. Only when the last note faded did she become aware of Harrison standing quietly by the door, a smile softening his face. "I wondered if you would come," he said, stepping into the room. "I've been hoping." Mei Lin felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment caught in this private resurrection. "I should have asked first," she said, half rising from the bench. "I don't want to intrude." "Intrude? My dear, that's the first time this piano has been played properly in years." He moved closer, his eyes bright with genuine pleasure. "You're rusty, but the foundation is still there. Your technique will come back with practice. It feels strange," Mei Lin admitted, sinking back down onto the bench, "like trying to speak a language I haven't used in years. I know the words, but not how to make them flow together anymore." Harrison nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Music is a language, the most universal one we have. And like any language, it stays with you, buried in your mind, waiting to be awakened again." He gestured to the piano. "May I join you? I could offer some guidance if you'd like." For a moment, Mei Lin hesitated, protective of this fragile new beginning. But there was something trustworthy about Harrison, something that reminded her of her old teachers, not the harsh disciplinarians who had driven her toward perfection, but the ones who had nurtured her love for the music itself. "I'd like that," she said finally, moving over on the bench to make room for him. They spent the next hour working through technique exercises, Harrison gently correcting her hand position, reminding her of proper fingering, encouraging her to relax her wrists. His teaching style was kind but precise, never critical, always constructive. "Music should never be a battle against the instrument," he said as she struggled with a particularly difficult passage. "It's a conversation. Listen to what the piano is telling you." By the time they finished, Mei Lin's hands ached, but it was a satisfying pain, the kind that promised growth, not injury. As they gathered the scattered sheet music, Harrison mentioned casually, "I'm here every Wednesday afternoon for the appreciation class. Most of my students are retirees looking for something to fill their time. They'd be thrilled to hear you play someday." Mei Lin shook her head quickly. "I'm nowhere near ready for an audience." "No pressure," Harrison assured her. "The offer stands if you feel ready. Meanwhile, the room is yours whenever you want it." After that day, a routine developed. Mei Lin would visit the community center 3 or 4 times a week, working around her shifts at the diner. Harrison would join her on Wednesdays after his class, offering guidance and encouragement. Occasionally, he would play for her, Bach and Beethoven and Chopin flowing from his fingers with the ease of decades of practice. "You could have been a concert pianist," she said once, after he finished a particularly beautiful rendition of Mozart's Sonata in C major. Harrison laughed, the sound warm in the small room. "I lacked what you have," he said simply. That spark. The ability to make the listener feel what you feel. Technical skill can be taught, but that's a gift. At the diner, small changes began to appear in Mei Lin. Her steps were lighter. Her smile came more easily. She hummed openly now, no longer trying to hide the music that had always lived inside her. Regular customers noticed the difference, commenting that she seemed happier somehow. Got a new boyfriend or something? Vicky asked one slow afternoon, watching Mei Lin arrange silverware in time to a melody only she could hear. Mei Lin just smiled. Or something, she replied, not ready to share her secret revival just yet. This newfound joy felt too precious, too fragile to expose to questions and explanations. For now, it was enough that the music had returned, flowing back into her life like water finding its natural path after a long drought. And if her fingers sometimes ached from stretching to reach keys they had forgotten, if her back sometimes complained from hours spent on the hard bench, it was a small price to pay for the feeling of completeness that had been missing for so long. 2 months passed quickly. Summer faded into early fall, bringing cooler mornings and earlier sunsets. For Mei Lin, the changing season mirrored the transformation happening within her. Music had re-entered her life like a long-lost friend, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence and joy. Her visits to the community center became the highlight of her week, a secret source of energy that carried her through long shifts at the diner and the other responsibilities of her life. One Wednesday afternoon in late September, Mei Lin arrived at the center to find an unusual number of cars in the parking lot. Inside, she could hear raised voices coming from the main meeting room. She slipped past, heading for her sanctuary in classroom C, but as she neared the piano room, Harrison emerged from the meeting, his face drawn with concern. "Oh, Mei Lin," he said, seeming relieved to see her. "I was going to call you later. Something's happened." The worry in his voice made her stomach tighten. "What's wrong?" Harrison guided her toward a pair of folding chairs against the wall. "The city council's cutting funding for community programs," he explained, sinking heavily into one of the chairs. "Budget shortfalls, they're saying. They're planning to close 5 community centers across the city, including this one." Mei Lin sat beside him, the news hitting her with unexpected force. "Close it when?" "End of November, unless something changes." Harrison ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. "They're voting on the final budget next month, but it doesn't look good." "But what about your music class? The yoga for seniors? All the other programs?" "Some might relocate to the remaining centers, but most will just end." He looked around the hallway with its faded paint and outdated notices. "This place isn't fancy, but it serves people who need it. Seniors who'd otherwise be isolated at home. Kids who need somewhere safe after school. Community groups who can't afford to rent meeting space." Mei Lin thought about the piano room, her private haven these past months, and felt a cold emptiness at the thought of losing it. "There has to be something we can do," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Harrison gave her a sad smile. "The community board is organizing protests, petitions, the usual. I'm going to speak at the next council meeting. But honestly, when the city decides to cut something..." He trailed off, his usual optimism dimmed. Their session that day was subdued. Mei Lin played mechanically, her mind distracted by the news. Harrison's guidance was less focused, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. When they finished earlier than usual, he mentioned casually, "There's a music competition coming up in October, the Griffin Foundation's annual showcase. Prize money is substantial. First place gets $15,000. Mei Lin packed her sheet music without looking up. "What made you think of that?" "It's been on my mind. The application deadline is next week." He hesitated. "You should enter," she laughed, a short surprise sound. "Me? I've barely been playing again for 2 months." "You've been playing your whole life," Harrison countered. "Yes, you're rusty, but your talent didn't disappear during those 6 years. It was just dormant. Harrison, I can't even get through Chopin's ballad without mistakes. So work on something else, something that showcases your emotional range rather than just technical precision." His eyes lit up with the excitement she'd come to recognize when he spoke about music. "Your interpretation of Debussy's Clair de Lune last week was breathtaking. You have a way of making the audience feel the music, not just hear it." "What audience?" "You're the only one who's heard me play in years." Harrison smiled. "An audience of one is still an audience." And I've been teaching music for 40 years. I know exceptional talent when I hear it. Mei Lin stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I appreciate your faith in me, but entering a competition after 2 months of practice is crazy. I'd make a fool of myself, maybe, Harrison conceded, but maybe you'd surprise yourself. And if by some chance you did well, that prize money could help save this place. The suggestion hung in the air between them. Mei Lin felt a flutter of panic at the mere thought of performing for judges, for strangers whose expectations would bear no relation to her current abilities. The idea was absurd. I need to get to work, she said, turning away. My shift starts at 4. But as she walked to the diner, Harrison's words echoed in her mind. $15,000 wouldn't save the community center by itself, but it would certainly get the city council's attention, prove that the center mattered, that it fostered real talent and deserved to survive. That evening at the diner, Mei Lin moved through her shift in a fog, her body on autopilot while her mind churned with conflicting thoughts. The competition was only 3 weeks away. Even if she entered, which was a ridiculous idea, she wouldn't have nearly enough time to prepare. And what would she play? And how would she get time off work? And what would she wear? And what if she froze on stage? And what if everyone laughed? Earth to Mei Lin? Vicky's voice broke through her thoughts. Table 6 has been waiting for their check for like 10 minutes. Sorry, Mei Lin mumbled, hurrying to get the bill. As she passed the table with the forgotten check, she overheard a conversation between 2 older women. They're closing the Oak Street Center, one was saying. Where am I supposed to go for my water aerobics now? The nearest pool is 30 minutes away by bus. It's a shame, her friend replied. That place has been around since our kids were small. Remember when they had those summer art classes? My Tommy loved those. Mei Lin placed the check on their table with a distracted smile and moved on, but their words followed her. The community center wasn't just her private piano sanctuary. It was a lifeline for people throughout the neighborhood, people who might have nowhere else to go if it closed. That night, after her shift, Mei Lin sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad. At the top of the page, she wrote competition pros and cons and began to list them. Pros. Prize money could help save the center. Would honor Harrison's belief in me, might help me fully reconnect with music, could be a step toward... What? She paused at that last item. A step toward what exactly? She had abandoned her musical dreams years ago. She wasn't looking to become a concert pianist at 32. With an ailing mother and responsibilities and a life built around practical necessities rather than artistic ambitions. Cons. Not enough time to prepare. Would need time off work and less money. Haven't performed in public in 6+ years. Will probably fail miserably. Terrified. She stared at the last word, surprised to see it on the page. Was that what this was really about? Not lack of preparation or time or appropriate clothing, but simple fear? Mei Lin pushed back from the table and walked to her closet. The black case was still there, pushed to the back corner, gathering dust. She pulled it out and laid it on her bed, running her hands over the scuffed surface before working up the courage to open it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay her sheet music from the conservatory, dog-eared pages marked with pencil notes from teachers and her own younger self. She flipped through them, memories flooding back with each familiar piece. Tucked in the back, she found a slim folder with her own compositions, pieces she had written during her second year, when her teachers had encouraged her to explore her own musical voice. One composition in particular caught her eye. Titled simply Home, it was a piece she had written after a rare visit to see her parents during spring break. It captured the bittersweet feeling of returning to a place that shaped you, finding it both familiar and irrevocably changed. Looking at the notes now, she could still hear it in her head. The gentle opening that built to a complex middle section before resolving into a peaceful, if somewhat melancholy, conclusion. Mei Lin sat with the music until well past midnight, occasionally humming phrases, making small notations where she saw room for improvement. By the time she finally went to bed, the decision had made itself. The next day she requested time off for the competition weekend. The day after that, she downloaded the application forms from the library computer, and the following Wednesday, she handed the completed forms to Harrison. I'm going to play my own composition, she told him, trying to sound more confident than she felt. A piece I wrote years ago called Home. I'll need to revise it, update it, but I think it's the right choice. The smile that spread across Harrison's face was worth every moment of doubt. "It's the perfect choice," he said. "Music that comes from your own heart is always the most powerful." The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Maylin practiced every moment she could spare, before and after shifts, on her days off, even in the early morning hours when sleep eluded her. Harrison offered guidance, suggesting adjustments to her composition, helping her refine her technique, listening patiently when she played the same passage over and over, seeking perfection. "Remember," he said during their final session before the competition, "technical precision matters, but it's your emotional connection to the music that will move the judges. Don't just play the notes. Tell your story." The night before the competition, Maylene sat alone in her apartment, too nervous to sleep. The community center's future hung in the balance, along with her own rediscovered passion for music. The weight of these stakes pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. When her mother answered, Maylin took a deep breath and said, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you. I've started playing again." There was a long silence on the other end, then a soft, tear-filled voice said, "Oh, my dear girl, it's about time." The Griffin Foundation Music Competition was held in the Grand Hall of the city's oldest hotel, a building with marble, columns and crystal chandeliers that had hosted everything from debutante balls to political fundraisers during its 100-year history. Maylin stood in the ornate lobby, clutching her sheet music to her chest, feeling wildly out of place among the other competitors. They all looked so polished. Young men in crisp suits, women in elegant dresses, many accompanied by stern-faced coaches or beaming parents. They carried expensive instrument cases and portfolios embossed with the names of prestigious music schools. They chatted about previous competitions, upcoming auditions, famous teachers they had studied with. And then there was Mei Lin, in a simple black dress borrowed from Vicky, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the only pair of heels she owned, scuffed at the toes from the 3 times she had worn them to weddings. Her sheet music was housed in a plain folder from the dollar store, and her only accompaniment was Harrison, who stood beside her with the calm assurance of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. "You look like you're about to run for the exit," he observed, smiling gently. "I'm considering it," Maylin admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone here is. They're real musicians. So are you," Harrison replied firmly. "Perhaps even more authentic than some of these conservatory products. You play from the heart, not just the hands." Before she could respond, a woman with a clipboard approached them. "Contestant number 28? Maylin Wong?" Maylin nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "You'll be on after the current performer in the short intermission. Please wait in the preparation area backstage." The woman gestured toward a door to the left of the grand staircase. Harrison gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "I'll be in the audience. Remember what we talked about. Just tell your story. The notes will follow." The preparation area was a small room with several chairs and a mirror. 2 other performers sat there already, a young man with a violin and a girl who looked barely out of her teens, nervously marking time with her foot. Maylin took a seat in the corner, trying to calm her racing heart as she listened to the muffled sound of applause for the current performer. She closed her eyes, mentally reviewing her piece. Home. She had revised it extensively over the past weeks, infusing it with new emotional depth drawn from her recent journey back to music. The opening section still evoked the tender nostalgia of her original composition, but the middle now built to a more complex exploration of loss and rediscovery, before resolving into a hopeful, forward-looking conclusion. It was the most personal thing she had ever written, and the thought of sharing it with strangers terrified her. A burst of applause indicated the current performer had finished. The young violinist was called next, and then the announcer's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a 15-minute intermission before the final group of performers." Maylin's stomach nodded. Just 15 minutes. And then she would walk onto a real stage for the first time in 6 years, in front of judges who expected excellence and an audience who had paid to hear serious musicians. What had she been thinking? She slipped out of the preparation room, needing air, and found herself in a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of past performers, young prodigies who had gone on to illustrious careers, distinguished musicians in the prime of their abilities, seasoned masters in their twilight years. All had performed in this historic venue. First competition? Maylin turned to find an older woman watching her with kind eyes. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. Is it that obvious? Maylin asked with a weak smile. The woman laughed. Only to someone who's been there. I nearly threw up before my first competition. Actually ran off stage halfway through my piece when I was 9 years old. How did you ever go back? My teacher literally dragged me back out there. Told me I could either finish the piece or explain to the audience why I was wasting their time. She smiled at the memory. Harsh but effective. I never ran away from a performance again. Maylin found herself relaxing slightly. And now? 40 years of performing, teaching, judging competitions like this one. The woman extended her hand. I'm Diane Chen, one of today's judges. Maylin's momentary calm evaporated as she shook the judge's hand. I shouldn't be talking to you. Isn't that against the rules or something? Diane waved away her concern. I'm not asking about your piece or giving you advice. Just one musician encouraging another. She studied Maylin with curious eyes. You're not the typical competition entrant. You're older, and you don't have that conservatory polish. What brings you here today? Something about the woman's direct manner invited honesty, a community center that needs saving, and a teacher who believes in me more than I believe in myself. Diane nodded thoughtfully. The best reasons to play are always for something larger than yourself. She glanced at her watch. Intermission's almost over. You should head back. Any last advice? Maylin asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Play your truth, Diane said simply. Technical perfection impresses judges, but emotional authenticity moves them. Good luck. With that, she walked away, leaving Maylin feeling strangely calmer. She returned to the preparation room just as the young violinist was finishing his piece. Judging by the applause from the hall, the girl with the tapping foot was called next. And then all too soon it was Maylin's turn. And now, performing an original composition entitled Home, please welcome Maylin Wang. The walk to the piano seemed to take forever. The stage lights were blindingly bright, making the audience a dark, indistinguishable mass beyond. The grand piano gleamed under the lights, its lid raised to project the sound to the back of the hall. Maylin sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and placed her music on the stand, though she knew the piece by heart. She took a deep breath and looked out into the darkness, her eyes gradually adjusting. In the third row, she spotted Harrison sitting forward in his seat, his face a picture of calm encouragement. And next to him, Maylin blinked in surprise, sat her mother in her wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse from the assisted living facility. Her heart swelled at the sight, but there were other familiar faces too. Vicky was there, and Darlene from the diner, and even Lou, the regular customer. They had all come to support her, this unlikely competitor with her borrowed dress and dollar store folder. Maylin placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes were tentative, her fingers still stiff with nervousness, but as the familiar melody unfolded, she felt herself relaxing into the music. This was her story. The bittersweet memory of what had been, the pain of what was lost, the unexpected joy of rediscovery. Her hands moved more confidently now, drawing out the emotional nuances she had carefully crafted into the composition. As she entered the middle section, her fingers danced across the keys with increasing assurance, building the complex harmonies that represented the turmoil of her journey. A wrong note here, a slight hesitation there. Not the technical perfection the other competitors might offer, but something raw and real and deeply felt. And then, as the piece moved toward its resolution, Maylin felt something shift within her. The music was no longer just notes on a page, no longer just a performance for judges and audience. It was a conversation between her past and present selves, a reconciliation, a homecoming. Her fingers moved with newfound freedom, bringing the piece to its hopeful conclusion with a delicate final chord that lingered in the air like a promise. For a moment, the hall was silent. Maylin sat motionless, hands still resting on the keys, afraid to break the spell. Then the applause began, scattered at first, then swelling into something warm and generous. She rose, legs slightly shaky, and bowed as she had been taught so many years ago. As she left the stage, she caught Harrison's eye. He was on his feet, applauding with unrestrained enthusiasm, tears streaming down his face. Her mother sat beside him, clapping weakly but with evident pride. In that moment, regardless of the judge's decision, Mei Lin knew she had already won something far more valuable than any competition prize. The remaining performances passed in a blur. When all the competitors had finished, they were called back to the stage for the announcement of the winners. Mei Lin stood among them, no longer feeling quite so out of place regardless of her borrowed dress and scuffed shoes. "The judges have made their decisions," the announcer said, holding 3 envelopes. "Third place with a prize of $5,000 goes to..." Mei Lin held her breath, but it wasn't her name that was called. A young cellist stepped forward to accept his award. Second place with a prize of $10,000 goes to... Again, not her name. A technically brilliant violinist received the envelope and trophy. And first place, with the grand prize of $15,000, goes to... Mei Lin had already started to step back, preparing to applaud for the winner when she heard Mei Lin Wang for her original composition, Home. The world seemed to stop. She stood frozen as the other competitors turned to look at her, their applause seeming to come from a great distance. Harrison's voice cut through her shock. "Go on!" And somehow her feet carried her forward to accept the envelope and crystal trophy from the beaming announcer. Diane Chen, the judge she had met in the hallway, stepped forward to shake her hand. "Your truth," she whispered with a wink. It moved us all. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The prize money, combined with the publicity from her unexpected win, was enough to rally community support for the Oak Street Center. The city council, faced with an overflow crowd at their budget meeting and a petition with thousands of signatures, voted to keep the center open for at least another year. Harrison's music appreciation class doubled in size, with many newcomers hoping to catch a glimpse of the Waitress pianist who had taken the competition by storm. Local news outlets ran stories about her unique journey, and a nearby private school offered her a position teaching piano to beginners 3 afternoons a week. And at Hank's Diner, customers sometimes had to wait a little longer for their coffee refills on the days when Mei Lin wasn't there. A newspaper clipping hung behind the counter, showing her at the piano during the competition, captioned "Local Waitress Wins Prestigious Music Prize." "She still works here 3 days a week," Darlene would tell curious customers. "Says she likes keeping her feet on the ground. But between you and me, she won't be behind this counter forever." And Mei Lin, balancing plates on busy mornings and coaxing music from eager young hands in the afternoons, finally felt like all the pieces of herself had come together. Not in the life she had once imagined, but in one that was uniquely, perfectly her own.